talk about this enough, but betting and fantasy have so many parallels. I talk to a lot of fantasy football players who are extremely dialed into specific players' prop markets as a way to gauge whether or not they want to use a player on any given week. So there are a lot of things that go in line from a betting perspective and a fantasy perspective. And now's the time where people are setting up their drafts. They're trying to figure out who their team's going to be week one. And we wanted to try to help some people out here a little bit. So let's start at the quarterback position, Michael, as you look at some of these rankings and ratings for fantasy quarterbacks in 2024. Josh Allen at the top of the list, Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes, last year's MVP, Lamar Jackson. And then you can't help but see Anthony Richardson, who only saw action in 4 games last year, at number 5 on this list. But you imagine that dual threat ability that he brings to the table, if he stays healthy, could be a pretty nice pick here in fantasy.
Well, that's why I think you have to really be clear here to use the word fantasy, because what you notice immediately when you see this list in order is the quarterbacks who can run and score touchdowns are at the highest of the list. Josh Allen, 15 rushing touchdowns last year. Lamar Jackson, red zone threat. That will be Anthony Richardson as well, because when they put the six-back offense in, meaning that they're able to run the football down in the red zone with the quarterback, all of a sudden, these guys are really good fantasy players. I'm shocked that Richardson's ahead of Love because Stroud, because I would make the case for Stroud. I know he's not a runner, but his yards per attempt down the field is pretty damn good. He doesn't, I mean, with Nico Collins and some of those guys, you know, like Nico Collins isn't even in the top 9 of these wide receivers in fantasy so far. And yet this guy, to me, he's not in the top 10. Devontae Adams is. Well, I would take Nico Collins because I know CJ is going to throw him the football.
I was going to say, I wonder if that's just because they got to share the wealth so much over there. Nico Collins, Tank Dell, Stephon Diggs, the now wide receiver 1 over there in Houston. You wonder who's going to get the most, who's going to be the biggest beneficiary of a lot of those targets. But I do like the dual threat ability, I think, is really, really interesting because you see these elite rushing quarterbacks are kind of a cheat code when it comes to fantasy. And somebody who's not on this list because he's a rookie, we haven't seen him to this point, does make me think Jaden Daniels could be an interesting quarterback from this standpoint as well after what we saw in his Heisman Trophy run at LSU last year.
No question. I think you nailed that. I mean, anytime you get that dual threat where you're going to get somebody who's going to run it and throw it, and down in the red zone, especially a team like let's take Washington, which is a great example. Washington has no power in their offensive line, right? They need the 6-back attack to run the ball in for them to be effective. They're just not going to line up in 2 tight ends, 2 backs, and say, okay, we're going to run the G play and kick you out, and you got no chance to stop it. If you overload left, we call it right. If you overload right, we call it left. No chance on that. I mean, Washington has no power. Their 3 technique, their guard won't block the 3 technique. It'll get blown up for a 4-yard loss. So I think that's why you have to bet teams with the creativity that goes into it. That's why Mahomes, even though he doesn't run a lot, his ability, the way Andy Reid wants to always distort the offense in the red zone. Yeah. That's the defense. That's his main goal. He wants separation because when everybody just drops to spots, there's a lot of guys with colored uniforms that you can't see where to throw the football. But when you have separation, I fake this way, you go that way. Now there's separation. A guy like Mahomes will make you pay for that.
Yeah, and to further that point, Michael, you look at a guy like Tua Tagovailoa, for example, who last year led the entire NFL in passing yards. He ranked number 21 in fantasy on a point-per-game basis, 11th overall in PPR rankings. Justin Herbert, also, you'll notice, not on this list because of the offense that he's going to be playing in this year. And that's despite the fact that, aside from quarterbacks named Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes, since Justin Herbert entered the league, they're the only guys that have more fantasy points at the quarterback position than him. But we expect this to be a different style offense under Jim Harbaugh. He did lose a couple of his significant weapons. We're going to see more run game, more physicality. So Justin Herbert's not in the top 10 here.
Right. And that's what you need. That you need those rushing touchdowns. You need that down there. And Lamar's going to get it to you. Now, I think you got to be careful. I think Lamar at 4 with Derrick Henry in the backfield. How's that going to work, Stormy? Are you handing it off to Derrick Henry, or are you going to let Lamar run his RPO stuff?
I would think so. You're giving it to your big-bodied back, right? Like that's what makes the most sense from that standpoint. What do you think about Joe Burrow here as somebody, Michael, who let's throw out 2022 because I feel like that was kind of a wash year, but 2023, excuse me, but 2022, the year prior, he was a top 10 quarterback in 10 of his first 13 games in fantasy, which included a stretch of 2 games, 781 yards. He was the best quarterback in fantasy each of those weeks. Jamar Chase being on the field would certainly help, but if he is, do you think Joe Burrow could be a worthwhile fantasy QB1 this year?
Yeah, I think it's going to be huge. And I said this the other day on the pod. I think with the addition of I think I said it on a Cameo. Somebody asked me to do a cameo on their fantasy
okay.
league, and I said it to the team. I said, look, to me, Chase should be close to Tyreek Hill, if anybody, if he doesn't hold out, because I think what's going to happen with the removal of Tyler Boyd, Chase is coming inside, and Burton's a really good outside receiver who's vertically fast, and so when you have an outside receiver that can really run fast, and you've got this inside guy, all of a sudden, how do you double the inside guy? How do you it's harder when you move him around, it's harder to really clamp him down and take him out of the game. But when he just lines up at X, you can jam him and play somebody over top of him. And I think Chase is due for a big year.